Are you hiding? Not physically, but are you hiding the real you? The version of you that has something to say, something to give, something to show the world, and instead of showing it, you bury it, you silence it. You tell yourself that you are not ready, that you are not good enough, that the world is not ready for you either. Because if you are doing that, if you are shrinking yourself to fit into spaces that were never meant for you, then this story is going to hit you hard, and I want it to. Welcome to English to Inspire, the channel where we learn English through the lives of people who refuse to disappear. And today the story we are going to explore is the story of a girl who is told her voice was wrong, her body was wrong, her language was wrong, and who went on to shake the entire world. If this channel speaks to your heart, if it helps you grow, please subscribe right now, because every week we bring you a new story that could change the way you see yourself and your future. The story we are telling today is the story of Shakira, born in Barranquilla, Colombia, a small girl in a big world full of people ready to tell her no. Shakira Isabel Mebarak Ripple was born on the 2nd of February, 1977, in a coastal city in northern Colombia, a place full of heat, music, and life, but also full of poverty, struggle, and limited opportunity for those who dared to dream too big. Her father was a man of stories, a man who typed on an old typewriter and filled his daughter's imagination with words and ideas. And from him, Shakira inherited something that no school can teach and no rejection can destroy, and that was the deep, burning belief that she had something real and original inside her that the world needed to hear. She began writing poems at age 4. She began dancing almost before she could walk properly. And when she moved her hips and felt the rhythm of Arabic music from her Lebanese heritage, mixing with the Colombian cumbia, in her blood, she felt something powerful awakened inside her, something that was entirely and completely hers. By the time she was 8 years old, Shakira already knew what she wanted to do with her life, and the certainty she carried was not the innocent wish of a child who wants to be a princess or a superhero. It was a deep, serious, almost fierce conviction that music was her mission, her language, her weapon, and her home. While other children played and worried about small things, she was already performing at school events, already writing songs in notebooks, already imagining stages that were much bigger than anything she had ever seen in Barranquilla. And the people around her, the adults, the teachers, the neighbors, they looked at this little girl with her wild curly hair and her intense eyes, and they smiled politely, the way adults smile when they do not believe in you, but do not want to be cruel about it. But here's what I want you to understand before we go any further into her story, because this is not just her story. This is a mirror, and when you look into it, you should see something of yourself. Every single person who has ever built something real started exactly where you are right now, which is at the beginning, uncertain, unproven, and surrounded by people who cannot yet see what you see inside yourself. Shakira had a fire in her chest from the very beginning, and that fire did not come from talent alone. It came from pain, from hunger, from the desperate need to be heard and to matter, and that is the same fire that is sitting inside you right now, waiting for you to stop smothering it with fear and doubt. The question is not whether you have something real inside you, because you do. The question is whether you are brave enough to protect it when the world starts pushing back. And the world will push back. It always does. It pushed back against Shakira before she could even finish growing up. And the way she responded to that pressure is exactly what we are going to explore together as this story unfolds. Because the first real blow came sooner than anyone expected, and it came from a place that was supposed to be safe. Shakira's childhood was not a fairy tale, and I want you to understand that clearly, because when we see someone standing on a massive stage with millions of people screaming their name, we tend to forget that they were once a child sitting in a small house wondering if life would ever give them a chance. Barranquilla, in the 1980s, was a city of contrasts, a place where the Caribbean heat mixed with the reality of economic struggle, and the Mebarak family knew that struggle intimately and personally. Her father, William Mebarak was a man of Lebanese descent who had built a small but stable life for his family. But when Shakira was still very young, his business collapsed completely, and the financial security that the family depended on disappeared almost overnight, leaving them in a vulnerability that would mark Shakira for the rest of her life. William Mebarak did something after that financial collapse that most parents would never think to do. And it changed everything about how young Shakira understood the world and her place in it. He took her to a park near their home where children who had lost everything lived on the streets. Children with no shoes, no food, no family. Children surviving alone in the hardest possible conditions. And he looked at his daughter and said something to the effect of, "You must study and work hard, or this could be your life too." That moment entered Shakira's soul like a blade, and it never left. Because from that day forward, she did not see her dreams as luxuries or fantasies. She saw them as survival. She saw them as the only road between where she was and a life of dignity and purpose. At school, Shakira was not the popular girl. She was not the easy, comfortable student that teachers loved without effort. She was intense and restless and full of an energy that did not fit neatly inside the lines of a traditional classroom. She would drum on her desk with her fingers. She would hum melodies under her breath. She would write lyrics in the margins of her school notebooks instead of taking proper notes. And the teachers saw this behavior not as creativity but as distraction. Not as potential but as a problem to be corrected and controlled. But here's the thing about people who are truly different, truly original, truly built to create something the world has never seen before. They almost never fit inside the systems that were designed for average outcomes. And Shakira was never, not even for a single day of her life, built for average. She auditioned for her school choir. And what happened next is one of those moments in a person's story that defines everything. Not because of what was said, but because of what she chose to do with it. The teacher listened to her sing, and instead of hearing a rough but passionate young voice, full of character and potential, she heard something she did not understand and could not categorize. And she told Shakira that her voice was too unusual, too vibrating, too strange, and that she could not be part of the choir. Some versions of this story say the teacher compared her voice to the bleating of a goat. And whether those exact words were spoken or not, the message was devastatingly clear. You do not belong here. Your voice is not welcome. Go back to being invisible. Now I want to stop here and ask you a direct question, because this moment in Shakira's story is not just history. It is happening to someone right now, and that someone might be you. Has someone in your life ever told you that your voice was wrong, that your ideas were strange, that your dreams were too big or too loud or too different? Has a teacher, a parent, a friend, a colleague ever looked at the most real and authentic part of you and told you that it did not belong? If the answer is yes, then you already know exactly how Shakira felt standing in that school hallway. And the only question that matters now is the same question she faced then. Do you let their words become your walls, or do you use them as fuel? There is a moment in every person's life, and I mean every single person who has ever tried to do something that mattered, where the world looks at them and says no. Clearly, loudly, without apology. And in that moment, the entire direction of a life can change depending on what happens inside the chest of the person receiving that rejection. For Shakira, that moment did not come just once. It came repeatedly. It came from multiple directions at the same time. And it came during the years when she was most vulnerable, most hopeful, and most exposed, which were the years when she was just a teenager trying to convince an industry full of adults that she had something real worth hearing. She had been performing locally. She had been writing songs obsessively. She had been building something inside herself that felt undeniable. And when she finally got the attention of Sony Colombia and walked into that room to audition, she carried with her every dream she had ever written in those school notebooks and every hour she had spent practicing alone when the rest of the world was sleeping. Sony said, "No, not maybe. Not come back in 6 months. Not we like your energy, but you need more time." They said no in the clearest possible way, telling her that her style was too undefined, too strange, too difficult to sell to a market that wanted something safe and predictable and easy to package. And Shakira went home And she felt the weight of that rejection. Because she was human. Because she was young. Because she had believed with everything she had that this was her moment. And the door had been shut firmly in her face by the exact people who had the power to open it. But what she did not do. And this is the part that separates the people who build something from the people who only dream about it. What she did not do was decide that Sony's opinion was the truth about her value, because she understood, even at that age, even in that pain, that the opinion of people who cannot see your vision is not a verdict on your potential. She kept writing. She kept performing. She kept pushing. And eventually Sony came back, or she found her way back to them, and they signed her to a record deal when she was just 13 years old. Which sounds like the happy ending, but was actually just the beginning of a new and even harder chapter. They signed her, but they did not trust her. They did not give her creative control. They surrounded her with producers who had their own ideas about what she should sound like. And the result was 2 albums that were produced with professional polish but without the raw, authentic soul that made Shakira who she was. Albums that were released into the world and then quietly disappeared because they had no heartbeat, no truth, no fire. The first album sold fewer than 1,000 copies, and the second album was not much better, and the industry began to look at this teenage girl from Barranquilla with a complicated voice and the unstoppable energy, and to make a collective decision that she was simply not going to work. Think about what that feels like for a moment. Because I want you to really sit inside that experience and not just read past it as a footnote in a success story you already know the ending of. She was 15, 16 years old. She had given everything she had to 2 albums that the world had ignored completely. She was being told by an industry full of experienced adults that she was a failure. And she was doing all of this while still being a teenager, trying to figure out who she was as a human being, not just as an artist. Most people, and I say this not to judge, but to be honest, most people would have stopped at this point. Most people would have found a quiet and reasonable way to let the dream shrink, to tell themselves that they had tried, that it was not meant to be, that there were other paths, safer paths, more realistic paths, waiting for them if they just had the courage to accept reality. But Shakira did not accept their reality, because she had a different one burning inside her, and the rejection that was supposed to extinguish her fire did exactly the opposite. It clarified something for her. It burned away everything that was not truly hers. Every compromise she had made. Every time she had softened her edges to please a producer or fit a format. And what was left after that fire was something harder and cleaner and more dangerous than anything she had shown the world before. Because she made a decision in the middle of that darkness that would change not just her career, but her entire life. And that decision was to go back to the very beginning, to lock herself away, to pick up a guitar, and to build everything again from nothing but the truth. There is something that happens to a person when they have lost enough, when they have been rejected enough, when the world has said no to them so many times that the fear of another no becomes smaller than the hunger for something real. And that something is a kind of freedom that most people never find because most people stop before they reach it. Shakira reached it at 16 years old, sitting alone with a guitar and a notebook, and the wreckage of 2 failed albums behind her. And instead of feeling destroyed by that wreckage, she felt, for the first time in her professional life, completely and totally free. Sony had essentially abandoned her. The producers who had shaped her first 2 records had moved on to other projects. The industry had written its quiet verdict and walked away. And in that silence, in that abandonment, Shakira found the most important thing any creative person can ever find, which is the uninterrupted space to hear their own voice without anyone else's opinion drowning it out. She locked herself in a room, and she wrote, and what came out of her in that period was not polished or safe or designed to please anyone. It was raw and personal and deeply connected to the pain she had been carrying since childhood, since watching those barefoot children in the park with her father, since being told her voice sounded like a goat, since watching 2 albums disappear into silence after she had poured her entire soul into them. She wrote. In Spanish, she wrote from her belly. She wrote songs that felt like diary entries and confessions and prayers all at the same time. And she played guitar on them herself, because she did not want anyone else's hands on the sound she was building. She did not want another producer deciding what was too strange, or too vibrating, or too difficult to sell. The album she was creating would be called Pies Descalzos, which means bare feet in English. And the title alone tells you everything about the spirit she was working from, which was the spirit of someone who has taken off every mask and every armor and decided to walk forward with nothing between their skin and the ground. Pies Descalzos was released in 1995, and what happened next was not an overnight explosion, but something more powerful and more lasting than that, which was a slow and unstoppable wave of real human connection, spreading from country to country across Latin America, as people heard these songs and felt something they had not felt in a long time, which was the sensation of being truly understood by a piece of music. The album eventually sold over 5 million copies. It won awards, it opened doors, and it transformed Shakira from a failed teenage experiment into a genuine artistic force. But more importantly than any of those numbers and trophies, it proved something to her that no one could ever take away, which was that the only version of her self-worth presenting to the world was the most honest one, even when, especially when, that honesty made other people uncomfortable. Now here is where I need to speak directly to you, because the story of Pies Descalzos is not just a music industry story, it is a blueprint, and I want you to read it as one. How many times have you tried to do something your way? Your real way. The way that comes from the deepest and most honest part of who you are, and then allowed someone else's doubt or someone else's formula to pull you away from that truth. How many times have you softened your idea, shrunk your vision, changed your approach not because you believed the change was right, but because you were afraid of what would happen if you showed up fully and completely as yourself, and the world still said no? Because that fear, that specific fear of being rejected as your true self rather than as a compromised version of yourself, is the single most paralyzing force in a human life. And it is the force that Shakira defeated in that room with her guitar and her notebook. The success of Pies Descalzos gave her momentum, but momentum is only useful if you are brave enough to direct it somewhere that scares you. And Shakira's next move was exactly that. A decision that everyone around her questioned. A decision that required her to start over again in a way that was even more uncomfortable than the first time. Because this time, she was not just rebuilding her sound. She was preparing to rebuild her entire identity in a language that was not her own. And the story of how she did that and why she did that is one of the most important lessons this entire journey has to offer you. When you have finally built something real, when you have fought through rejection and silence and doubt, and come out the other side, holding something that the world has recognized and respected, the most comfortable thing you can do is stay exactly where you are. Protect what you have built. Repeat the formula that worked, and enjoy the safety of being known and appreciated in the space you have already conquered. And that comfort, that reasonable and understandable desire to stop risking and start enjoying, is exactly where most people's growth ends. Not in failure, not in rejection, but in the warm and suffocating embrace of their own success. Shakira looked at the success of Pies Descalzos and the follow-up album, She-Wolf, which in Spanish was called Donde Están los Ladrones. And instead of seeing a fortress to protect, she saw a launching pad. And instead of asking herself how she could repeat what had worked, she asked herself the question that only the truly hungry ever ask, which was, what is the biggest, most impossible, most terrifying next step I could possibly take from here? The answer she arrived at was both simple and enormous, and when she told the people around her what she intended to do, the reactions ranged from confusion to genuine concern for her sanity. Because what she said was that she wanted to record an album in English, that she wanted to enter the English-speaking music market, that she wanted to compete not just in Latin America where she was already beloved and celebrated, but on the global stage where the rules were different. The competition was brutal, and where she would arrive as an unknown with an accent and a style that did not fit neatly into any existing category. The music industry people around her reminded her, gently at first, and then more forcefully, that Latin artists who had attempted this crossover had almost always struggled, that the American market was not interested in being challenged or confused, that she should be grateful for what she had already achieved, and build on it carefully, rather than gambling. Everything on an adventure that had a very low probability of success. Shakira heard all of this advice, and she made a decision that I want you to memorize, not just as a fact about her life, but as a principle for your own, which was that she would not allow people whose imagination was limited by what had already been done to set the boundaries of what she was going to attempt. She began teaching herself English with a dedication that was almost frightening in its intensity, studying the lyrics of Beatles songs, line by line and word by word, not just to learn vocabulary, but to understand how the English language carried emotion, how it moved and breathed and fell differently than Spanish, how she would need to reshape not just her words, but her entire artistic instinct to communicate authentically in this new tongue. She did not take a shortcut. She did not hire someone to write English lyrics for her and simply perform them phonetically. She insisted on understanding every word she sang from the inside out, because for Shakira, authenticity was never negotiable. Not when she was 16 in that room with her guitar, and not now. The album she created through this process was called Laundry Service, and the process of making it was long and difficult and full of moments where she could have stopped and gone back to the safety of what she already knew. She worked with producers who pushed her in new directions. She rewrote lyrics dozens of times until they felt true rather than just correct. She challenged herself to be a student again after years of being a master, and she did all of this with the same fierce and stubborn refusal to compromise her essential identity that had carried her through every previous obstacle in her life. The people who had told her the crossover would not work were watching closely, and the music industry was waiting with its usual mixture of skepticism and hunger, ready to celebrate if she succeeded, and ready to say they had warned her if she failed. What I want you to take from this moment in her story is not just the fact of her courage, but the specific texture of it. Because courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is the decision to move forward while the fear is still loud and present, and making very convincing arguments for why you should stay still. Shakira was afraid. Of course she was afraid. She was stepping into a world where she had no guarantee, no safety net, no history of success to lean on, and she was doing it voluntarily, by choice, by hunger. And that hunger, that refusal to be satisfied with good when great was still possible, is the exact energy that the next chapter of this story is going to show you exploding into something the entire world could not ignore. Laundry Service was released in October of 2001, and what happened after that release is the kind of story that people in the music industry still talk about when they want to explain what it looks like when preparation, authenticity, and perfect timing collide into something that cannot be stopped or predicted or manufactured by any amount of money or marketing strategy. The first single from that album was a song called Whenever, Wherever, and when that song hit the radio stations and the television screens of the English-speaking world, something happened that had never quite happened before in that way, which was that an entire global audience stopped what it was doing and turned its head toward a woman from Barranquilla, Colombia, who moved like no one they had ever seen and sang with a voice that sounded like nothing they could easily categorize or compare. And instead of rejecting what they did not recognize, they were completely and helplessly pulled in by it. The song became one of the best-selling singles in history. The album sold over 13 million copies worldwide, and Shakira went from being a celebrated Latin artist to being a genuine global phenomenon, almost overnight. But I want you to understand something about that overnight success, because overnight is never the real story. Overnight is just the moment when the rest of the world finally catches up to the work that someone has been doing in private for years and years and years. The Shakira that the world discovered in 2001 was not a new person. She was the same girl who had written poems at age 4, the same teenager who had survived 2 failed albums, the same young woman who had locked herself in a room with a guitar and built pies descalzos from pure truth, the same artist who had studied Beatles lyrics, word by word, to earn the right to sing in a language that was not her mother tongue. Every single thing the world fell in love with in 2001 had been built through years of invisible work, invisible pain, invisible determination. And the lesson in that for you is as clear and as direct as anything I will say to you today, which is that the life you want is being built right now, in the hours that no one is watching, in the work that no one is applauding, in the decisions you make when you are tired and scared and wondering if any of it is ever going to matter. Shakira did not stop at laundry service. She never stopped, because stopping was simply not a concept her body or her mind understood. And over the following years, she continued to push herself into new territories, new collaborations, new languages, new sounds, building a catalog of music that crossed every border that the industry had told her she was not allowed to cross. She performed at the FIFA World Cup in 2010 in South Africa. She delivered one of the most talked about Super Bowl halftime performances in history alongside Jennifer Lopez in 2020. She collaborated with artists from completely different worlds and genres and languages. And every time the world thought it had figured out what Shakira was and what box she belonged in, she did something that shattered the box and reminded everyone that she had never agreed to be contained in the first place. She became the most followed Spanish-speaking artist on social media in history. She broke streaming records. She collected Grammy Awards and Latin Grammy Awards with a consistency that spoke not of luck, but of relentless and disciplined excellence. And through all of this, through all the stages and the records and the awards and the screaming crowds, she never lost the thing that had made her worth following in the first place, which was the sense that when Shakira stood in front of a microphone, she was telling you something true about herself, something unguarded and real, something that cost her something to say out loud. And that quality, that radical honesty in her art, is rarer than talent, and rarer than beauty, and rarer than any technical skill, because it requires a kind of courage that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. She had earned that courage the hard way, through rejection and failure and loss, and it had become the foundation of everything she built, which meant that everything she built was strong, in the way that only things built on truth can be strong. Now, I want you to stop for a moment and think about what you are building. Not your career necessarily, not just a professional goal, but the larger thing, the life, the identity, the version of yourself that you are constructing day by day. Through every choice you make, and every fear you face or avoid, are you building it on truth? On the honest recognition of who you actually are, and what you actually want, and what you are actually willing to sacrifice to get there? Or are you building it on the opinions of other people, on the idea of what success is supposed to look like, on a version of yourself that is safe and acceptable and approved by everyone around you, but hollow at the very center? Because Shakira's success did not come from being what the world wanted her to be. It came from being so completely and unapologetically herself that the world eventually had no choice but to come to her. And that is not just a music lesson. That is the most important life lesson this story contains. There is a lie that success tells you, and it is one of the most dangerous lies you will ever hear. And the lie goes like this. Now that you have made it, now that the world knows your name, and the stages are big, and the numbers are real, the hard part is over, and what comes next is the reward. The ease. The life you fought so hard to reach, where pain is finally behind you and everything from here is lighter and brighter and free. Shakira reached the kind of success that most people cannot even imagine. The kind of success that fills stadiums and breaks records and puts your face on screens in countries you have never visited. And she discovered what every person who has ever built something real eventually discovers, which is that success does not protect you from pain. It does not build a wall between you and loss. It does not make you immune to the things that break human beings. Because human beings are not broken by failure alone. They are broken by life. And life does not stop arriving just because your album went platinum or your name became famous. In 2017, Shakira faced something that had nothing to do with music or stages or record sales. Something that reached into the most private and personal part of her existence and shook it violently. When the Spanish tax authorities accused her of failing to pay taxes on a significant amount of her income during the years 2012 and 2014, claiming that she had been a resident of Spain during those years, while she declared her residence elsewhere. The legal battle that followed was long and public and exhausting, playing out in the press and in the courts simultaneously, with opinions and judgments coming from every direction while she was trying to live her life, raise her children, and continue creating music in the middle of a storm that she had not chosen and could not simply wait out in private. She maintained her innocence throughout. And in 2023, she reached a settlement with the Spanish authorities. But the years of that process, the weight of it, the public nature of it, took a toll that no amount of professional success could compensate for or erase. And then there was the personal devastation that arrived in 2022, when her relationship of 12 years with the Spanish football player Gerard Piqué ended in a very public separation that became one of the most talked about breakups in the world. Not because either of them invited the attention, but because they were both famous enough that the world felt entitled to an opinion about their private pain. Shakira had moved to Barcelona for him, had built her life around their family, had made sacrifices that any person in love makes without calculation or regret. And when that relationship ended, it did not end quietly or cleanly. It ended in a way that was messy and human and exposed to millions of eyes that watched and commented and formed judgments from the safety of their distance. She was dealing with the end of a long relationship, the restructuring of her family, the needs of her 2 young sons, the legal pressures of the tax case, and the relentless attention of a global media machine, all at the same time, all in public, all without the option of simply closing a door and grieving in peace. What she did with that pain is what I need you to understand, because this is where Shakira's story moves from impressive to genuinely instructive. Because she did not hide the pain, and she did not perform strength she did not feel. Instead, she did the thing she had always done since she was a girl with a notebook and a guitar. She turned it into art. She released a song called Shakira and Bizarrap Music Sessions, number 53, in January of 2023. And the song was direct and fierce and full of the kind of raw emotion that people recognize immediately as truth. And it broke streaming records in a way that no one had predicted, reaching 100 million plays on Spotify faster than any song in history at that time. Not because it was a perfect pop formula, but because it was a human being speaking honestly about real pain in a way that millions of other human beings recognized in their own lives and their own hearts. The lesson here is one that I want you to carry with you long after this story ends, because it is one of the most important things this journey has to offer you, which is that your pain is not your enemy. Your pain is your material. And the question is never whether life is going to hurt you, because it is. It always does. It hurts everyone without exception and without apology. The question is what you decide to do with the hurt when it arrives. Whether you let it bury you, or whether you pick it up and use it to build something that connects you more deeply to the world around you. Because the moments in Shakira's story where she was most broken were always, without exception, the moments that produced her most powerful work. There is something that most people never talk about when they tell the story of a successful person. Something that gets left out of the highlight reels and the award acceptance speeches and the magazine covers. And that something is this specific and personal cost of building a life at the highest level. The things you give up. The fears you carry quietly. The moments where the foundation of everything you have built feels suddenly uncertain beneath your feet. Shakira paid costs that went far beyond the professional sacrifices of long hours and difficult decisions. She paid costs that reached into her body itself, into the physical instrument that was the center of everything she had ever built. And when that instrument was threatened, she faced a kind of fear that no rejection letter and no failed album and no tax authority could have prepared her for. In 2017, the same year that her legal troubles were intensifying, Shakira suffered a hemorrhage on her right vocal cord, a serious injury that forced her to cancel an entire world tour and left her facing the possibility that she might never be able to sing again in the way she had always sung. Think about what that means for a moment, not as a fact in a biography, but as a human reality. Because this was not just a career setback. This was an attack on the very thing that had defined her, since she was a small girl in Barranquilla, singing in school hallways and writing melodies in the margins of her notebooks. Her voice was not a tool she used to make money. Her voice was the language through which she had always expressed the deepest and most essential parts of herself. It was the thing that had survived every rejection and every failure and every doubt. And now her own body was threatening to take it away from her. She went through surgery. She went through rehabilitation. She went through the long and terrifying process of not knowing whether the voice that came back would be the same voice that had gone away. And she did all of this while the rest of the world continued to move and demand and expect, completely unaware of the private battle she was fighting with her own physical reality. She recovered. And the recovery itself was a testament to the same stubborn refusal to accept defeat that had carried her through every other obstacle in her life. But the experience left a mark, not just on her body, but on her understanding of what it means to be human in a life that is constantly asking you to be superhuman. And this is where I want to speak to you directly, because I know that somewhere in your life right now there is something that is costing you more than you are willing to admit to the people around you. Some pressure or fear or exhaustion that you are carrying privately while presenting a functional and composed face to the world. And I want you to know that that cost is real, that it is valid, and that the fact that you are still moving forward while carrying it is not nothing. It is everything. It is the most important thing about you. Shakira responded to all of this accumulated pain, the personal loss, the legal battles, the physical injury, the public exposure, by doing what she had always done, which was to refuse to let suffering be the last word. She threw herself back into her music with an urgency and an honesty that her audience felt immediately. She continued her work with the Pais Descalzos Foundation, which she had established back in 1997 to bring education and nutrition to vulnerable children in Colombia. Because even in the middle of her own storms, she had never forgotten those barefoot children in the park that her father had shown her when she was a little girl. And she had never stopped believing that the responsibility she carried as someone who had escaped poverty and built something significant came with an obligation to reach back and pull others forward with her. The Pais Descalzos Foundation has built schools in Colombia, has provided meals and psychological support to thousands of children, has created opportunities for young people who would otherwise have had none. And Shakira has been not just a celebrity patron who lends her name and moves on, but an active and personally invested force in that work. Because, for her, it was never charity. It was memory. It was the fulfillment of a promise she had made to herself as a child, standing in that park, understanding for the first time what it meant to have nothing. And this dimension of her story, this commitment to using her success as a bridge rather than a destination, is what transforms her from an impressive artist into something larger, into a person whose life genuinely points toward something worth thinking about and worth carrying into your own choices and your own understanding of what a life well lived actually looks like. When we look at a life like Shakira's from the outside, what we tend to see is the surface, the hits, the performances, the records broken, the stages conquered, and we organize all of those things into a story that feels clean and linear, a story that goes from struggle to success in a straight line that makes sense in retrospect, even though it made no sense at all while it was happening. But if you have been listening carefully to everything we have explored together in this journey, you already know that the real story is not the surface. The real story is the philosophy, the set of invisible beliefs and principles that guided every decision Shakira made when the path was unclear and the outcome was uncertain. And the voices telling her to stop were louder than the voice inside her, telling her to continue. Every life that produces something extraordinary is organized around a philosophy, whether the person who lived it could articulate that philosophy in words or not. And Shakira's philosophy, the one that runs like a current beneath every chapter of her story, is one that I believe has something essential to teach every single person who is listening to these words right now. The first pillar of that philosophy is the absolute refusal to allow external definitions to become internal truths, which is a complicated way of saying something very simple, which is that Shakira never once allowed what other people said about her to become what she believed about herself. When Sony rejected her, She did not decide she was untalented. She decided Sony was wrong. When her first 2 albums failed, she did not decide she was a failure. She decided she had been compromised and needed to find her way back to her truth. When the choir teacher told her voice was wrong, she did not decide her voice was wrong. She decided the teacher lacked the ears to hear what she was offering. This is not arrogance. Please understand that clearly. This is not the blind refusal to learn or grow or accept honest feedback. This is something much more specific and much more important, which is the discipline of knowing the difference between an opinion and a fact, between someone's limited perception and the actual truth of your potential. The second pillar is the belief that authenticity is not just an artistic value but a survival strategy, that the most dangerous thing you can do in a world that is constantly pressuring you to conform and simplify and sand down your edges is to agree with that pressure and become a version of yourself that is easier for other people to digest. Every time Shakira compromised her authenticity, in those first 2 albums produced by people who wanted her to be something safer and more predictable, the work died. It had no pulse. It sold nothing. It connected with no one. Because people can feel the difference between truth and performance, even when they cannot explain how they feel it. And every time she returned to her authentic self, every time she picked up her guitar and wrote from her belly and refused to let anyone else's hands shape what she was building, the work lived. It breathed. It traveled across languages and borders and cultures and found the hearts it was looking for. Because truth always finds its audience, eventually, if the person carrying it refuses to put it down. The third pillar, and perhaps the most important one for you to hear today, is the understanding that a life of meaning is not built for yourself alone, that the hunger that drives you and the gifts that distinguish you and the success that eventually comes from combining that hunger with that discipline carry with them responsibility that extends beyond your own comfort and your own achievement. Shakira never forgot where she came from. She never forgot those children in the park. She never allowed the distance between her childhood reality and her adult success to become so large that she stopped feeling the weight of what it means to have opportunity when others do not. The Pies Descalzo's foundation is not a footnote in her story. It is the moral center of it. It is the answer to the question of what success is actually for. And it challenges every one of us to ask ourselves the same question. Not just what are we building, but who are we building it for? And what will remain of our work when the stages are dark and the music has stopped playing? These 3 pillars, refusing external definitions, choosing authenticity over safety, and building for something larger than yourself, did not make Shakira's life easy. Nothing makes a life easy, but they made it coherent. They gave it a through line that connected the barefoot girl in Barranquilla to the woman on the Super Bowl stage. A through line that you can trace clearly now that you have seen the whole shape of the journey. And now, having seen that shape, having understood the philosophy that built it, there is only one thing left to do, which is to stop looking at her life as something separate from your own and start asking yourself the question that this entire story has been quietly and patiently building toward. Because that question is not about Shakira at all. It was never about Shakira. It was always, from the very first word of this journey, about you. You have just spent 40 minutes inside the life of a woman who was told no by everyone who had the power to say yes, who was told her voice was wrong, her style was unsellable, her ambition was unrealistic, her language was a barrier, her pain was a weakness, and who took every single one of those verdicts and refused them, not loudly, not with anger, not with a need to prove anyone wrong, but quietly and stubbornly and daily, through the simple and relentless act of continuing to show up for the things she believed in when every reasonable argument in the world was telling her to stop. You have heard her story. You have followed her from that park in Barranquilla, where a little girl learned what it meant to have nothing. Through the rejection letters, and the failed albums, and the locked room, and the guitar, and the bare feet, and the broken vocal cord, and the public heartbreak, and the legal storms, and the streaming records, and the foundation, and the stages. And now you are here, at the end of her story, which means you are standing at the beginning of a conversation that has nothing to do with her, and everything to do with you. So let me ask you the question that this entire journey was building toward. The question that I need you to sit with, not for a second, but for a long, uncomfortable, honest moment, because it deserves that kind of attention. What are you waiting for? Not in the vague, motivational poster sense of that question, but specifically, concretely, honestly. What is the actual thing that you are waiting for before you begin moving toward the life you know you are supposed to be living? Are you waiting for permission? Because Shakira never got permission. She gave it to herself in a room alone with a guitar at 16 years old, and she never looked back. Are you waiting for the right moment? Because there is no right moment. There has never been a right moment in the history of any life worth examining. There is only the moment you are in right now, and the choice you make inside it. Are you waiting for the fear to go away? Because the fear does not go away. It travels with you. It sits in the passenger seat for the entire journey. And the only difference between the people who build something and the people who only dream about it is that the builders decided to drive anyway. You have a voice. I do not mean that metaphorically. I mean it in the most literal and serious way possible. You have a specific and unrepeatable way of seeing the world, a specific set of experiences and wounds and hungers and gifts that no other person on this planet possesses in exactly the combination that you possess them. And that combination is not an accident. It is not random. It is the raw material of something that only you can build. Something that the world actually needs, even if the world does not yet know how to ask for it. Shakira's voice was called wrong by the people who were supposed to know. And that voice went on to move hundreds of millions of people across every language and every border and every cultural divide. Because the things that make you different are not your weaknesses. They are your most powerful assets. And the moment you stop trying to correct them and start learning to use them is the moment your real life begins. Think about the children in that park. The ones William Mebarak showed his daughter so that she would understand what was at stake. The ones who had nothing. No shoes, no food, no future. No one reaching back to pull them forward. And think about what Shakira did with the life she built. She did not hoard it. She did not protect it behind walls. She turned it into a bridge, and she kept building that bridge further and further back, toward the people who needed it most. And now I am asking you, what are you going to do with your life? Not the life you have been given, but the life you are going to build from everything you have been through. Because everything you have suffered and survived and learned and carried has been preparing you for something. And that something is not going to build itself. It is not going to wait forever. And it is not going to be built by anyone else. The world does not need another version of someone who already exists. The world does not need you to be safer or quieter or more reasonable or more acceptable or more like what everyone around you has decided success is supposed to look like. The world needs you barefoot, in the most honest and exposed and authentic version of yourself. Building the thing only you can build, using the voice only you have, for reasons that are larger than your own comfort and deeper than your own ambition. Shakira started with nothing but a fire in her chest and a refusal to let anyone extinguish it. You have that same fire. The only question that remains is whether you are finally ready to stop covering it with your hands and let it burn.